And now let's turn our attention to the West African nation of Niger. The coup leaders are still in power, for now at least. They've been issued an ultimatum by a bloc of West African countries. These countries have said that Niger's military junta must restore the presidency of the ousted leader, Mohamed Bazoum. Either that or risk a military intervention. These countries will intervene militarily. That's what they've said. The deadline they've set is of Sunday. But it seems that the junta has no intention of stepping down. They're already issuing decrees and scrapping decade-old agreements. The target of their ire seems to be France. France once colonized Niger. There's been an outpouring of anger against France recently. Supporters of the coup have blamed France for the poor conditions in their country. And it's likely that the junta will continue to paint Paris as the villain, which throws up the question, what happens to France's interests in this country, in Niger, especially its supply of uranium to power its nuclear reactors? You see, France relies on nuclear power for 70% of its electricity production, and Niger is one of its biggest suppliers of this nuclear fuel. So will the coup in Niger lead to blackouts in France? Here's a report.
Last week, a coup took place in the West African nation of Niger, and it does have its supporters. Hundreds of them have been taking to the streets of the capital, Niamey. Ask them why they support the coup, and you'll find a common theme in their answers.
The world must understand that Africa's misfortune is France, the authorities, because the French are citizens like us, so we can't hate them. But we hate their authorities because they've done too much harm to our country, and really, enough is enough.
We have uranium, we have diamonds, we have gold, we have oil, and we live like slaves. Why should we? Until when? We can't accept it. The French base in Niger must leave. We don't need the French to keep us safe.
There have been attacks on the French embassy in Niger's capital. The French troops stationed in Niger are being asked to go home. And supporters of the coup have been vocally opposing France. The military junta has also been ramping up the anti-French rhetoric.
In view of France's casual attitude and reaction to the internal situation prevailing in our country, the National Council for Safeguarding the Homeland has decided to denounce France's security and defense cooperation agreements.
5 military deals have been revoked. These deals were signed decades ago, between 1977 and 2020. So, to revoke them clearly sends a message that Niger's new junta considers France the enemy. And that could be a good strategy to get public support. France and Niger share a troubled history. Niger was a French colony till 1960. So were a lot of other West African nations: Mauritania, Senegal, Mali, Guinea, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Benin. All these nations were part of what was once called French West Africa. And no matter what tone-deaf justifications the former colonizers give, colonization always leads to the exploitation of the colonies. There's a reason Niger was one of the poorest nations in the world even before the coup. This is a country rich in natural resources: uranium, gold and oil, like one of the demonstrators mentioned earlier. But it was still considered one of the poorest nations in the world, because it has been in a situation that most former colonies face: an unequal power dynamic with its former colonizer. Some critics call it neo-colonization. Raw materials like uranium from Niger go to a former colonizer like France. It is used to fuel French nuclear power plants. The French energy sector benefits, sells its electricity abroad, generates billions, and then gives some of the money back to Niger as aid. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This actually happens. France generates around $3.3 billion a year selling electricity. Meanwhile, Niger, which supplies about 18% of France's and 5% of the world's uranium, remains poor. You can imagine that it would frustrate the people there. Niger's uranium is just one example. There are other resources and raw materials in all the former colonies that continue to get exploited. And it could explain the anti-French sentiment in the other coup-hit nations in the region. like Mali and Burkina Faso. It's an existing wound, a festering injustice, and military juntas can easily tap into this negative sentiment to become popular among the people. But then what? If Niger stops sending uranium to France and Europe, the colonizers will still survive.
Economic and trade relations between Niger and France are extremely tenuous. Of course, people always think of uranium when they talk about Niger, but over the last 10 years, it appears that Niger is France's fifth largest supplier of uranium. So it is no longer the strategic partner for uranium that it may have been in the 60s, 70s and the 80s.
EU utilities have sufficient inventories of natural uranium to mitigate any short-term supply risks, and for the medium and long term there are enough deposits on the world market to cover the EU needs. That is something that we have ascertained.
Finding new partners takes time. Time that the fragile West African economies may not have. And the military junta isn't likely to have the best economic minds available. So Niger needs to think carefully. Is it worth risking a complete collapse just to vent against its former colonizer? And France needs to do better as well. Whatever outreach Macron has undertaken through the years has clearly failed to sway Niger. France needs to acknowledge its failures in West Africa, and it needs to become an equal partner to its former colonies.
We just told you about the Indian economy. The Russian economy is booming too. In fact, contrary to expectations, the war has failed to dent growth. New numbers are out. In the month of June, Russia grew at 5.3%. This is on a year-on-year basis. Clearly, Western sanctions have not had the kind of impact they expected. The hope was that sanctions would put pressure on Russia and force Vladimir Putin to end the war. They've achieved the very opposite. Putin is doubling down. Russian forces are hiring more soldiers. Not just at home, they're scouting for talent in Kazakhstan too. That is their new recruitment ground. Moscow has released an online ad. In fact, multiple ads. They feature Russian and Kazakh flags and a slogan which says, "Shoulder to shoulder." The ad makes an attractive offer to Kazakh citizens. Sign up to fight for the Russian forces and get a joining bonus of 495,000 rubles. How much money is that? Some $5,200 US. That's the joining bonus they're offering. And what is the salary? At least 190,000 rubles or some 2,000 US dollars, plus some perks, which they've not spelled out. Next question. Where will these new recruits go? The ad does not mention Ukraine. It says the potential recruits will join the Russian army in the Far East, specifically the Sakhalin region. Why is Russia recruiting from Kazakhstan though? Because they're running out of recruits at home. So they're casting a wider net, and Kazakhstan, on paper at least, seems like a good fit. The country is a former Soviet republic. It is home to about 3.5 million ethnic Russians, plus Russia and Kazakhstan are allies. So there's a lot going for this, but there's a problem too. The Kazakh government does not support the war in Ukraine. Also, their law bans citizens from fighting abroad. But that's not stopping Moscow from trying. They're pulling out all stops now. Even coming up with a TV show, a daily show, 1 hour long, featuring the wives and mothers of Russian military recruits. They'll narrate their stories and tales of heroism. The idea is to encourage more people to sign up. There are recruitment billboards all over Russia. The target audience of these ads are taxi drivers, fitness instructors, and security guards. This ad encourages them to give up their jobs and, quote unquote, become a warrior instead. That's what they're asking people to do. There's a slogan too. You're a man, so be one. That's what it says. And there are Hollywood-style recruitment videos. Take a look at this one. So ads like these have been doing the rounds. What have they achieved so far? By the month of June, 117,000 new recruits had signed up. This is after Putin mobilized 300,000 reservists, which happened last fall. It led to a mass exodus from Russia. Several thousand eligible recruits left the country, although it does not seem to have hit Russia's war plans. Their forces are still fighting. They're fighting with the same level of intensity. And now they're looking for more recruits. What does this tell you? That Russia plans to continue the fighting. Same is the case with Ukraine. Their forces are also recruiting in large numbers, but Zelensky is unhappy, not because he can't get the soldiers he wants to get. Zelensky is unhappy with the recruitment centers. They conducted an audit into these centers and they found rampant corruption. The full report is not out yet, but some stories have emerged. There was one case from Odessa. The head of the recruitment center is in detention now. He's accused of corruption and embezzlement. A trial is believed to be underway. Apparently, this official took a lot of money. How much? A little over $5 million. This was government money, but the official used it to enrich himself. Reports say he got a house in Spain and a Mercedes-Benz car, all in the name of his mother, apparently. And this is just one case. It's not clear how deep the rot is. Like I said, the full report is still awaited. President Zelensky has pledged to fix these recruitment centers now. He said that there are, quote-unquote, numerous abuses which he finds, and I'm quoting again, he finds them revolting, he says. But this is not the first time he's making these promises or such comments. Corruption has been a perennial problem in Ukraine. Zelensky has fired dozens of officials during the course of this war. Some were even part of his inner circle. He fired them. But this has failed to fix the problem. So this is what we have. A conflict that is stretching far longer than expected. And both Russia and Ukraine grappling with their limitations. And speaking of limitations, it's not a word in the Chinese president's dictionary. Xi Jinping is called the chairman of everything because he controls everything in China, from the government to the Communist Party and the military. Xi Jinping has the power, all the power, without accountability. And now it's hurting the people of China. In fact, people in China have seen a lot of devastation in recent days. Large parts of the country were flooded. This was triggered by heavy rains, the heaviest rainfall, in fact, that China has seen in 140 years. More than a dozen people are dead. Several more are missing. Tens of thousands have been evacuated. Usually, that's what you expect when floodwaters enter people's homes. But a different story is playing out in northern China, in the Hebei province. Here, the Communist Party has issued different orders. They said, instead of saving the people, first save the projects, the president's projects, save them first. Officials were mobilized to secure these projects. And who issued these orders? Well, they came from the very top. Ni Yufeng is the Communist Party boss for this province of Hebei. He released a statement. Some cities of Hebei share a border with Beijing. Ni's statement was a message for them. It said, and I quote, border cities must resolutely play a good role of moat for the capital. Basically, Ni is saying, drown if you have to, but save Beijing. His strategy is inspired from the medieval era when castles needed protection. They would make a ditch around them and fill it up with water. This is what you call a moat. It acted as the first line of defense for the castle in the event of an attack. Now, China is replicating the same concept to keep Beijing safe. That's how bad the flood situation is. And Ni's statement is only making it worse for the people. After suggesting the moat defense, he gives more instructions. He wants a specific city to be kept out of this moat defense. This is the Shaoshen area. It's about 100 kilometers away from Beijing. It was an important project for Xi Jinping. China started building the city in the year 2017, and the president gave it a lot of importance. In the past, he said that this project is of, quote-unquote, millennial significance. So it's very close to the president's heart. And Ni's job is to protect it. He said, and I'm quoting again, this is the top priority of flood control in our province. So the instructions are quite clear. Save Shaoshen at any cost. The rest is expendable. This message went out far and wide. It reached the masses too, and they're furious. They expressed their anger on Weibo. Weibo is China's Twitter-like platform. I have some comments with me. This is what the people have been saying, and I'm quoting. This official only wants a promotion. He doesn't care whether people live or die. Another one says, you want to protect Beijing, Tianjin, Shenzhen and Daxing Airport, then we Hebei people don't need you, get out of Hebei. This is what people are saying. Many more have called for this man's resignation, but it seems his moat plan is being implemented. The province of Hebei is flooded. More than 1 million people have been relocated. At least 9 people are dead, but that's an undercount. Several people are reported missing. They were probably swept away by the flood water, so the death toll will rise whether or not China declares it. They have a reputation of managing data. But there's no denying that the crisis is grave. Experts say the flood waters may take months to recede. Where is the Chinese leadership? On vacation. Not making this up. The Chinese government is on a break. They've started their annual vacation. The top leaders are in the seaside town of Beidehi. They go there every year. It's an annual ritual and an old tradition. And for some reason, they keep this holiday a secret. There are no photographs, no dates are announced. So how does the world come to know? Every year, observers look for signs. They look for patterns of behavior. That's how they figure out if the leaders are on vacation. And this time, a meeting by Xi Jinping's chief of staff gave it away. He met with 57 tech experts in the very same town, Beidehi, and so it can be assumed that the rest of the Chinese leadership is also present there. What do they do in this town every year? It is believed that they meet in a relaxed setting, they share concerns with the current leadership. In the past, such meetings used to be a frank exchange of opinion. Even dissent was allowed. But that may not be the case anymore. Xi Jinping does not like hearing complaints. Reports say the scope for party elders to speak their minds has shrunk in China, and that becomes obvious when you consider some recent events. A few weeks back, Xi Jinping fired his foreign minister. We told you about that. Qin Gang disappeared more than a month ago. No one has seen him since.
I firmly believe.
Some reports say he was punished for having an affair. Others say he's been purged. There is no official version of what happened. Also missing are some top generals of the Chinese army, 2 former heads of China's rocket force. Xi Jinping replaced them without notice, and the generals are nowhere to be seen. Will the president address these departures in Beidehi? Honestly, we don't know. Even if he does, it may not come out. So this is China's story. Hebei is submerged, and Chinese leaders have disappeared. But then again, this is not a first. Xi Jinping did the very same thing in 2020. When a virus was killing people in China, their president disappeared. Now floods are causing havoc, and he's abandoned his people again. And now to Bangladesh. It is going to polls in 6 months, but the violence is already boiling over. Last week, its capital Dhaka witnessed clashes. On one side, there was the opposition. They want elections under a caretaker government. Tens of thousands of them took to the streets. They demanded Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's resignation. On the other side were supporters of the ruling party. They called it a peace rally, but things in Dhaka were barely peaceful. Anti-government protesters blocked roads. Police fired rubber bullets and tear gas. There were clashes with pro-government marchers. Stones were pelted, vehicles were torched, and hundreds got injured.
The country cannot be run in the way this autocratic government is running it. That's why we came here to take back our voting rights. It has been a while since I voted as a citizen.
As we're in power, we are the sentinels of the general public's safety and security. That is why we took a position on the streets today by order of the Prime Minister. Therefore, nobody can play with people's lives and fire.
In Bangladesh, violence ahead of elections is not new. But this time, the opposition is up in arms. They want a caretaker government to conduct the election. To understand why, let's look at Bangladesh's history. From 1991 to 2006, only 2 leaders ruled Bangladesh alternately. It was either Sheikh Hasina of the Awami League or Khaleda Zia of the Bangladesh National Party, BNP. No government has won successive terms or had won successive terms in Bangladesh. That's because of a system of neutral caretakers. Basically, when an elected government completes 5 years in power, an interim government takes over. It controls state institutions for 3 months, and then elections are held. This is done to prevent electoral manipulation, to keep elections free and fair. In 2008, Sheikh Hasina came to power. And a few years later, she scrapped the caretaker system. This was in the year 2011. They called the provision unconstitutional. They scrapped it. And since then, Sheikh Hasina's party has won 2 more elections, in 2014 and then again in 2018. But they were marred by boycotts and allegations of rigging. The West called it manipulated, and they're doing the same this time.
We are concerned about the reports of intimidation and political violence in Bangladesh surrounding this weekend's political protests. We encourage the government of Bangladesh to investigate reports of violence thoroughly, transparently, and impartially, and to hold the perpetrators of violence to account.
The US has announced visa curbs for those who undermine the vote. The EU too is mulling restrictions. The Hasina government says the polls will be free and fair. The opposition is not convinced though, especially the BNP. It's a party, like we said, led by former Prime Minister Khaleda Zia. In 2018, Zia was charged with corruption. She got a 10-year prison term, but she's currently living at her residence in Dhaka due to health concerns. Her absence has led to a power vacuum in the BNP, her party. After she was jailed, her son, Tariq Rahman, became the party's acting chief. But now he's living in exile in the UK. He too has legal troubles. He's been sentenced to 9 years in jail. So that leaves the party's Secretary General, a man called Mirza Fakhrul Islam Alamgir. He may not be a crowd puller like Khaleda Zia, but he is the party's only face on the ground right now, and he is the one leading the anti-government protests. They say they will boycott the election if it is held under Sheikh Hasina. The fact is, even if they do contest, their chances do not look very good, which brings us to the question, will the election in Bangladesh be free and fair? The government says yes, the West says no. What about India? Well, unlike the West, India is not commenting. Bangladesh is India's friend and neighbor. Also, New Delhi does not believe in weighing in on the internal matters of others. We'll have to wait and see how this plays out. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We have more from China, where a car drives off a collapsed bridge on a highway and falls into a crater. No casualties were reported, thankfully. A red statue of Vladimir Putin pops up in a Roman playground. The effigy shows Putin sitting on top of a miniature war tank. Selfies claim yet another casualty. German tourists destroy a historic statue in Italy while posing for a photo. And finally, what makes August 4th significant? Let's go back to the year 1956 when Apsara became operational. Apsara is India's oldest nuclear research reactor and Asia's first. We're leaving you with these images. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.